So I never actually made a review video of my undergraduate degree, and that was basically because I thought all the videos I made and the Instagram posts and whatever were a pretty fair representation of my time. Yeah, I mean, it would have undoubtedly got me views, but it would have been a bit pointless because I just didn't really have much to say. Like, I had a fantastic 3 years. My department was everything I hoped it would be, and more, to be honest. I felt incredibly encouraged and supported the entire time I was at Lancaster, which is where I did my undergrad. And like, yeah, there were minor adjustments I'd make to the syllabus. There were definitely some modules that I enjoyed less than others, but by and large, I guess I felt like I came out of it as a well-rounded physicist with a good, solid knowledge and understanding of all the topics I'd covered. Yeah, I was just very happy with the quality of my education. Now this year, I wouldn't necessarily say that my videos have been a fair representation. Not because I've been intentionally hiding things, literally just because I haven't made many videos. I'm never going to be the most regular YouTuber in the world, like this is literally just a side hobby for me. But anyway, I think it's important that I make this video so that I don't accidentally misconstrue my experience. Masters are expensive if you're not on a scholarship, and it makes me a little bit nervous when I get comments from people saying I've inspired them to apply to this course, because while I don't regret the year, I also wouldn't necessarily recommend it either, and I want to just kind of chat about why that is. Obviously this is just my personal experience and how I personally got on. Like, if you asked anyone else on my course, they'd tell you something completely different because we're all individuals. And it is also obviously worth bearing in mind that I had a very atypical experience because of the pandemic, and I think that's definitely made me feel more negatively about the course as a whole. But with all those disclaimers, this is honestly what I think. So I'm going to start off by talking about the course in depth, and if you're not studying physics or maths, you might want to skip this bit because it's probably going to be quite technical, so it might end up being quite boring. A brief summary, if you don't want to hear about it in detail, would be that the course wasn't as good as I hoped it would be when I started the year, and that I kind of felt very alone and unsupported. If you want to skip the details on that, go to this timestamp I'll put here. Alright, so a very basic summary of how my masters worked is that you had to take at least 10 units from this whole list that I'll put here, and there are no restrictions at all on what combinations of modules you can take. Some modules have prerequisites, but they're not strict prerequisites, so it might say something like you should have taken an undergraduate fluid mechanics course to be able to take geophysical fluid dynamics, but they won't like check that you've done that. It would just be a case of they'll expect you to catch up in your own time if you haven't, which is a lot of free work, and I know because I did exactly that with fluid dynamics and geophysical fluid dynamics. Anyway, the thing that first attracted me to this masters was this wide variety of modules on offer, because they give you the ability to specialise in theoretical physics and specific areas of theoretical physics to a much greater extent than you can do in the 4th year of an integrated master's degree, because integrated master's degrees, while they are the same level, because they're undergraduate degrees, they'll often have still have some compulsory modules. But anyway, having now finished the masters, I can say that this array of modules, at least in my opinion, isn't as good as it might first seem, for kind of 3 main reasons. So the first one is that a lot of these modules aren't actually bespoke modules for this degree. Loads of them are borrowed from 4th year maths and from 4th year physics, which means that the lecture sizes are huge, much bigger than in my undergrad at least. And it also means that the modules aren't tailored to what's important for a theoretical physicist to know. So for example, one of the modules I took was numerical linear algebra, which is basically a module about how we can use matrix methods to create efficient computer algorithms to solve various mathematical problems. And it was really interesting, but it was a module borrowed from the maths department, and it was mostly taken by students on the MSc mathematical modelling course, so the syllabus didn't focus on the topics or algorithms that it would be most important for a theoretical physicist to know. Essentially, I guess the degree just isn't as unique or tailored as it might first appear. It's quite a new masters, and it kind of feels like it's been made by creating a few new modules specifically for this degree, but then padding it out with a lot of existing modules from the maths department and the physics department, and because of that it essentially ends up functioning like a joint honours maths and physics degree. And joint honours degrees, as I'm sure anyone else who's ever done one can attest to, are a massive pain. Logistically, they just kind of never seem to work out. Different departments have different conventions, so you're always trying to juggle the two. A classic example I have is mid-afternoon on the first Friday of 2nd term. We got an email forwarded to us with all the maths department deadlines for that term, and there had been a couple of days between the maths students getting this email and it eventually being forwarded on to us, so those of us on the mathematical and theoretical physics masters. So I opened this PDF as soon as the email came through, which was after lunchtime on Friday, and scrolling through like the deadlines, I realised that I'd already missed a deadline, because the first deadline I had was apparently 9 AM on that Friday, but I just hadn't been told about it, so that was great. Anyway, the second reason why the array of modules isn't as good as it might first appear is because they might not be accessible with your academic background. You can come onto my degree with either a bachelor's in maths or a bachelor's degree in physics. Mine was in theoretical physics, so I'd always been taught in a physics department before. And if you come from a physics background like I did, there are some maths modules that you're just not going to be able to take. I was really interested in geometric group theory, for example, but after downloading the lecture notes and looking through them, I just realised I would be miles out of my depth. Like, it would take me way too long to catch up to speed on the notation that was being used, the style of proofs that were being used, the style of exam questions that were used. Like, you can't go from third year of a physics degree and jump straight into pure graduate level mathematics modules. The third reason why this array of modules didn't turn out to be as great for me as I expected it to be is because I very much think it's designed for depth rather than breadth. By which I mean, if you want to specialise in theoretical particle physics or theoretical astrophysics, I think you would be fine, because you can go very deep in these specific areas. But I came onto the course wanting to specialise in condensed matter physics, theoretical condensed matter physics, and there aren't as many condensed matter options, which I knew. Like, I knew that when I applied. I looked through the module list, I was very aware of that. But the thing I didn't anticipate, which ended up screwing me over, was I took quantum field theory in first term, which is QFT for short, and I expected to really enjoy that, but I just didn't really enjoy it at all. I much preferred advanced quantum theory, which is kind of like another module that complements QFT, and this was a problem because I didn't really want to do more QFT, so that ruled out a lot of modules in later terms that I was banking on taking, such as advanced QFT or QFT and curved spacetime. So after like ruling out the advanced QFT modules, and also after ruling out the pure mathematics modules that I really thought, you know, I'm not going to be able to cope with these because I don't fulfill the prerequisites and I don't have unlimited time to kind of catch up for all of my modules. There actually wasn't that much choice as to what I could take. I would still say that I managed to specialise in theoretical condensed matter physics, but I had a really weird mix of modules, a lot of which I definitely wasn't planning on taking at the start of the course. To be fair, there was some good that came out of this. Like, some of the modules that I ended up taking that I never anticipated taking were actually super interesting. Soft matter physics, for example, if I hadn't been stretched for module choices, I don't think I'd have ever tried that one out, but it was so cool. Anyway, this is a list of the modules that I ended up taking, ordered top to bottom as to how much I enjoyed them. And this is a list of how well I did in them, ordered from best to worst. Not all of the modules are there because some of them were just pass-fail, so I didn't get a mark for them. I also want to say, because I think it's only fair that I mention this, that I did have the option to switch one of the 10 units out for a dissertation instead. With hindsight, I wish I had done. The reason why I didn't choose a dissertation at the time was because the deadline for choosing a dissertation topic and for sorting out a dissertation supervisor basically really nicely coincided with me having a massive crisis about what I wanted to do with my life, which I've talked about in another video, so I won't go to depth. But yeah, it just wasn't a good time for me. There were many small things like going wrong. I wasn't enjoying QFT, I was struggling with the workload because I took way too many modules in first term. So yeah, I decided not to do a dissertation in the end because I think it would have been too much for me at the time. But I think if I had have taken a dissertation, I think that might have made it a little bit better. Anyway, moving on from the choice of modules, another thing that didn't really live up to my expectations was the sense of community on the degree. So don't get me wrong, like, the people on the degree were lovely, and I'm not just saying that. There are a few people in my year who've gone out of their way to reach out to me, like, during lockdown, despite the fact that we didn't really talk much at uni, and that meant a lot to me when I was really struggling by myself with the degree in my home bedroom. There are a few small things I can think of that just spring to mind when I think about the people on my course. So something that springs to mind was on the induction day, someone on my masters who'd been to Oxford for his undergrad, so he'd been there for 3 years, went out of his way to find a group of us that were new, and he showed us around some of the colleges at lunchtime and showed us like a really nice place to get lunch. And he saw I had like a cycling jumper on, so he gave me advice about cycling around Oxford. And I know it's going to sound really small, but that made a big difference to me when I was in this new city where I didn't know anyone. Also, we had a course rep, so like someone in my year who was nominated to be like our representative, and she wrote an email the night before our first January exam with a good luck message, and it was one of the like sweetest good luck messages I've ever read. So yeah, it's not that the people on my course weren't nice, the people were nice, but I didn't really feel an overarching sense of community. And I think this is because we shared a lot of modules with fourth year maths and with fourth year physics, and also because I took like quite an eclectic mix of modules in the end. I never really found I guess a tight friendship group in my year. in the same way that I had one at undergrad. I did have friends in particular modules, but they weren't necessarily people on the same masters as me, like some of them were 4th year mathematicians. And to be fair, in first term I did get to know like a really nice group of people on my course, and we used to go and do problem sheets together for one of my modules, but I didn't end up doing any of the same modules as them in second term, which was really sad. So yeah, that ended at the end of first term. I do realise, by the way, that not having many friends on your course might sound like a bit of a trivial problem, but in physics, like, I really do think one of the best ways of learning is collaboratively, particularly with really difficult like exercises and problem sheets. It can be really helpful to see how other people approach the question. You can learn a lot from your peers, and I don't think I quite realised until I started my masters and I didn't have my old kind of network anymore, how much of my resilience in the face of the huge university workload came from the fact that I had a lot of friends that were doing the same thing as me at the same time, so we just kind of knew that we'd make it through together. Again, in the interest of fairness, I do want to quickly say that the person who was in charge of the kind of administrative and welfare things for my course was so lovely and went above and beyond to help us out. And in second term, I think it was her that set this up, but they started doing free lunches every Friday for people on my masters to try and like facilitate us being able to meet each other and get to know each other. So I do think they realised there was a kind of like problem with the lack of community and support you felt if you weren't taking the very standard set of modules. So I never actually managed to go to any of those Friday lunchtime sessions because I was busy, but I did really appreciate the idea. There were also a few admin things that were only like small problems, but if they'd have been fixed, it would have just made life so much easier. So one of those is the fact that Oxford don't make personal timetables. Instead of the university giving you your own timetable, you have to download one PDF from the maths department and write down when all your maths modules are, and then you have to download another one from the physics department and copy down all the relevant modules from that one. And then throughout the term you have to keep an eye on your email account in case there are any changes in lecture times or locations. And again, because the university doesn't have personal timetables, that means they don't know when you're free, so you have to sign up to classes and stuff yourself using a doodle poll to say all the times you're free. Except maths, he used a form instead, and the options would be something like 1 to 2 PM on Friday of week 2 and 5:30 to 6:30 PM on Tuesday of week 5, so it wasn't even like a simple day of the week type thing. And I know it might sound like a really stupid thing to complain about, but honestly, like, just shoving all of these different dates in your timetable and trying to make sure that you had copied everything down, you hadn't lost any emails, you hadn't lost any class times or anything. It was just so time consuming and stressful and like a lot of unnecessary extra effort. It took me about half a day to sort it out before the start of each term. Like I had to block aside like 4 hours where I just sit down and go through everything and make sure that I did have all of the times in my Google Calendar. It just seems ridiculous that it's something that we have to do individually, when if you think about it from a programming point of view, it's something that can be so easily automated. Like just click if you're taking this module and then it will produce the timetable for you. Like I don't know why they haven't got the IT department to make that. Another frustrating thing is that there's no central university system for accessing all your lecture notes. If you go to a university that uses Moodle or that uses Blackboard, you log in and then there'll be a tab for each one of your modules, and if you click on the module name you'll be able to see all of the resources there. So all of the lecture notes, all of the announcements, all of the deadlines, all of the problem sheets, all in one place, very easy to find. Oxford don't do that. I mean, of course they don't. It was such a weird mix of what they did. So some of my modules had lecture notes on the maths websites, as in the maths department websites. Some of my lecturers made their own course websites. One of my lecturers used Canvas. Some didn't have any website at all, they literally just emailed stuff out, and it was so hard to keep track of what was stored where, what was due in when. Again, it just meant you had to spend so much time on admin tasks that would have been much better off used as learning time. Another tiny thing that actually made a big difference was we weren't given a map of all the buildings, and as far as I know there isn't a map that you can find, because timetables would say something like the Martin Wood Lecture Theatre in the Department of Physics. That's fine, but the Department of Physics in Oxford is made up of more than one building in separate locations, so being told something is in the Department of Physics is not helpful. Even if you guess the building right, you have no idea where the lecture theatre actually is. Particularly some of the smaller ones took me like a long time to find. There was also no set results day. This is the uni policy, which is not fun to be waiting in limbo with no idea of how long it will be. All of this stuff is basically just the university not having a good enough IT system for students, which, yeah, like, it might sound like it's a small thing, but particularly when you have a university like Oxford that's devolved across like 40 something different colleges. I just think if there was some central website platform where you could log on and you could see your timetable, you could see all of your notes, you could maybe see your email, you could maybe see some kind of university news, I think it would make it feel much more like one whole university. Because at the moment I would say I felt like a theoretical physics student, and I would say I felt like a Keble student. Keble was my college, but I wouldn't necessarily say I felt like an Oxford University student. I didn't really feel any sense of kind of university identity or belonging. Like the only thing that made me feel like an Oxford student was varsity cross country and duathlon, and then also BUCS cross country. Okay, so another big thing that I can't really make this video without talking about is the pandemic and how that affected my year. So because of Oxford only having 8-week terms, we had broken up for Easter before everything basically went to shit. So I had a really normal last week of second term actually, including a meal out for my friend's birthday, a relay race, and my boyfriend came up to visit, which are 3 things that seemed so normal at the time, but obviously with hindsight I wish I'd appreciated them more. But yeah, so for me and for all Oxford students, the pandemic only really affected from the start of the Easter holidays onwards. So the Easter holidays, third term, and my summer exams. So I do know from social media that a lot of people weren't particularly happy with how the university handled third term by putting it online, but like I wasn't that fussed by that, to be honest. I was pretty happy with their response, all things considered. The pandemic is shit for all of us, including the uni administrative staff who would have had to make these like huge decisions about whether or not to shut the university libraries, whether or not to send students home, whether or not to commit to putting all lectures online. You know, these are real people too, and they were dealing with very, very little government guidance. I also know that quite a few people were disappointed that they had to do third term online and that there was no option to kind of drop out for a year and then do third term in 2021, which like I get it. I was really disappointed too. It really sucks to lose a whole term of your uni experience, particularly if you're only somewhere for 3 terms. Like I'm never going to have a summer term in Oxford, but at the same time, again, it's one of those things that sucks, but I do kind of think it was fair enough. As in, I think it was fair enough that they didn't let home students defer unless they had extenuating circumstances, because if a load of people deferred for a year, which a lot of people wanted to do, there would be no space for next year's intake. And what Oxford meant to say to like new postgrads or to this year's year 13s, like, sorry, our university is full, you know, you can't come. However, while I think the only option the university had was to put lectures online, whether or not they were still good value for money is a different question. I'm not convinced they were. Very luckily, which I'm very grateful for, I was on a scholarship, but if I wasn't, I don't think I would have been happy about being charged full fees, and I particularly feel for international students. I think they were very much ripped off. So yeah, lectures and classes online, fair enough, but the way my course and some other courses put exams online was, in my opinion, absolutely ridiculous. We didn't have a safety net, and I mean, you can't implement a safety net on a 1-year course, so that's fine. But we also weren't given the option of deferring our exams to a later exam season, whether at the end of the summer holidays or deferring them to summer term exams in 2021. We literally had 2 choices. The first one was to not sit our exams, and then we could apply for something called DDM, which stands for Declared to Have Deserved Masters, which is basically a certificate recognising and explaining the extenuating circumstances, as if everyone doesn't know about the pandemic already, but it is not a master's degree. So our second option was to sit our exams as normal, but from home. So essentially, if you wanted a master's degree, you had no choice but to suck it up and sit your exams in June, regardless of what was going on in your life. So we had exactly the same exam papers we would normally have. We had exactly the same time limits for exams that we would normally have. And we had to start the exam at the same time that we normally would have done if we were like sitting them in the exam hall. So that was either 9 o'clock or 2:30, depending on if it was a morning or an afternoon exam, and we were marked to the same standards we would normally be marked to. Literally the only difference was that they added a little bit of time to the end of each of our exams to give us time to like scan our answers. So you had to like scan it with your phone and turn it into a PDF and then upload the PDF. And like, I'm sorry, but that's not fair. I was in a very fortunate situation that I could move back to my family home. I had my own bedroom in my family home. I was able to buy a desk and a nice desk lamp, so I did have somewhere like nice to study and to sit my exams. But even I found it really, really hard, especially since, if you remember, this was back in the period of lockdown where you could only leave the house once a day and you weren't allowed to meet up with anyone outside of your household. So like, if I think back to my 3rd year exams, the thing that got me through was being able to revise in big groups with my friends, and then like any time we ended up stuck on something or we were getting upset, we'd just go out for like a little walk around campus. And like obviously none of that was possible this year, and just because I think it's so important to stress, like I was one of the most fortunate students on my course in terms of the circumstances I found myself in. There were students in so much worse situations than me, so to just like charge ahead for the sake of academic rigour, which is a literal quote, is ridiculous. Especially since, you know how I said we shared a lot of modules with 4th year maths and 4th year physics. So 4th year physics had all of their exams cancelled, and 4th year maths had the number of exams they had to sit halved to kind of lessen the burden in the middle of the pandemic. And Oxford's scale exam marks, they use like a normal distribution. So for those of us who'd taken maths modules, which is most people on my course, we were being directly compared to the maths students who had taken half as many exams as us. They had half as much stuff to revise for. And when we pointed out that this wasn't particularly fair, we got told it was fine because our masters had higher entrance requirements. Also in third term, I had this issue with this lecturer refusing to send me lecture notes, which happened in the one video that I filmed, so I'll insert that footage here because I think it gives a much clearer kind of indication of how upset I was by this at the time. This was about a month before my exam started, by the way. So I didn't get as much done as I wanted to yesterday. This is a very long story cut short, but basically I moved out in a panic at the start of the lockdown because I didn't want to get trapped in Oxford, and in moving out I forgot to clear out one of the drawers in my room, which had, like, in amongst other things, like some charging leads, but also a couple of notebooks that I used for my rough class notes. It wasn't a problem because my college very kindly offered to store it for me, which was very nice, but it's become a problem in that one of my lecturers uses the kind of lecture note style where he's got the full notes, but the copies we get have blank spaces in them to kind of force us to turn up to lectures and make a note of things, and the notes I made were in one of these notebooks that I left behind in Oxford. So I didn't really want to ask for help, so I've been trying to fill in all the gaps by myself, but I was finding it really difficult because basically there's just a gap in the notes. It doesn't say what's meant to go there, it's just completely blank. So I was like, you know what, I'll just email the lecturer and ask for like the full copies with all the derivations in. So I did that last night, and I basically had an email back saying no, which really upset me because Oxford, in my opinion, have not dealt with the pandemic particularly well. Unlike some other universities, I realise other universities are being this shit as well, but basically I just have to sit all of my summer exams as normal, just uploading PDFs rather than sitting them in an exam hall without a safety net or anything, and that was hard enough. But if they're just not doing something as simple as emailing us lecture note PDFs for no reason, like their reasoning was basically just any other year we wouldn't give them out, so this year we're not going to give them out either. It's like any other year I wouldn't have left my notes in Oxford, or I would be back in Oxford. Anyway, basically that just really upset me because I'm struggling to concentrate anyway, and I just feel like instead of our lecturers helping us, it just feels like at this point, to be honest, like they're making things more difficult for the sake of it, and I don't get it. Then to top things off, while I was just generally having a really shit time trying to do university from home, and also my grandpa had just passed away, I got an email saying that graduation had been cancelled, and if we wanted our certificate posted to us, we had to agree not to go to any graduation at all, and even then the university will only post our certificate out to us once the next in-person graduation has happened. So if there aren't any in-person graduation ceremonies at Oxford until 2021, I can't get my certificate until 2021, which is one of the most stupid things I've ever heard of. It's literally like a sheet of paper, right? That's all a degree certificate is. You don't need to bless it in Latin or whatever other weird crap they're doing that means that they can't just post them out now. For context for just how ridiculous this is, my friends from Lancaster who were graduating this year got their degree certificates in the post before I even found out if I'd passed my masters, and if I decide I do want to go to a graduation in person, I'm not allowed to pick up my certificate until the day of the ceremony, which could be, and I quote here, 2 or more years from now. In the meantime, we can order a letter from the university, which is a PDF that they email out to us, which basically we can show to an employer or we can show to another university to confirm that we have done this degree. But this letter, it's literally a PDF that they email out. It takes over a month to arrive after you order it. There are many more things I could critique, but I'm guessing you're probably getting bored by now, so I'm going to move on to some more positive things about the year, because there were positive things. Yeah, let's start by talking about the college system. You probably know this already, but Oxford University is made up of 44, I think, individual colleges and permanent private halls. So everyone at Oxford is a member of a college, and there are 2 types of colleges that you can join when you join Oxford as a postgrad. There are postgrad only colleges, and then there are mixed undergrad and postgraduate colleges. The main downside to being in a postgrad only college is that it can be a bit dead, and they tend to be a lot newer than the mixed colleges, so they don't tend to have as much money for scholarships and stuff. But the main downside to being in a mixed undergrad and postgrad college is that normally all of the accommodation on the main college site is used for undergrads. So postgrads have to live out of college, either in private accommodation or in houses that the college owns, but they might be a long way away from the college site. So there just isn't the same kind of sense of community as when all the postgrads are in the same place. So I ended up choosing Keble as my college. This is a photo of Keble. And I chose it because it is a mixed undergrad and postgrad college, but it has a graduate campus near the main college site, which is known as the HB Allen Centre, or HBAC for short, and that's where the majority of the postgrads live. So it meant that I didn't have to choose between like living off-site or living in a postgrad only college. I also thought, to be completely honest, that the buildings look cool. I like the fact that it didn't look like your ordinary Oxford college. Anyway, in terms of facilities, the main college site for Keble has a library, although I didn't use it much because it was a bit dark and a bit intimidating and just a bit scary. I prefer like modern light libraries. My favourite Oxford library was the Vere Hamsworth Institute Library, which has these huge glass walls and ceilings, so it kind of feels like you're outside even though you're inside. Anyway, so Keble also has its own bar, and it has common rooms for the undergrads and common rooms for the postgrads, and it has a dining hall. You know how for certain places there's like a fact that everyone knows about it, so Big Ben, like the fact that everybody seems to know about Big Ben is the bell isn't actually called Big Ben. So the fact like that about Keble is that apparently it has the longest dining hall in Oxford. I've never fact checked that, but that's something that everyone always says. Yeah, I get quite a few questions about formal halls, so just to chat about them quickly. Essentially, they're completely optional, and as a postgrad at Keble, you can just live like a normal student. So HVAC is made up of just modern student flats, essentially. Hall is just like, literally just if you want a meal out, you can go to hall if you want to. So I guess the best analogy I have for it is that at undergrad, if me and my friends just wanted to like meet up for a cheap meal and a catch up, we'd go to Spoons. At postgrad, hall kind of became the equivalent of Spoons, I guess. I know that's a weird comparison, but it's like similar prices and like a similar kind of vibe, as in like you go down with your friends. It's a bit more Latin than in Spoons though. But yeah, so I didn't actually go that much. I went a couple of times in Freshers Week because it was free. There were some welcome dinners, and then I also went for my birthday with my flatmates. That was like week 1 of term, or maybe that was Freshers Week actually, but it was very early on anyway. I went once when 2 of my flatmates' girlfriends came up to visit. I went once for Chinese New Year. There was like a special formal, so I went with my flatmate and his friends, and I went once when one of my friends from undergrad came down to visit. So yeah, I think I went 4 times. I also went to 2 black tie dinners. They're basically the same as formals, but you wear fancy clothes, and also the puddings are much nicer. So I went to the black tie sciences formal, and I also went to the Christmas meal. I'm pretty sure formal hall cost £7. I might be wrong, but it was somewhere in that region. Anyway, HVAC, which like I said is the graduate campus, is basically just across the road from the main college site. It's like no more than 5 minutes walk away, including the time it takes to wait across the road. And HVAC has a common room with televisions, a kind of kitchen counter thing, a table tennis table, a lot of sofas and beanbags, board games, there's a guitar, there's a piano, there's just a lot of stuff like that, so it's like a nice place to hang out. And then there's also a quiet common room, and that just has like desks and workspaces and sofas, kind of like a library but without the books, I guess. There's also a gym, but to be honest I didn't buy a membership because I don't think it's a very good gym, and I didn't think it was very good value for money, and also it's in the basement, which is a bit creepy, and obviously there's like a laundrette as well, and that's in the basement as well, which is great. And there's also a terrace you can go on the roof, but that gets shut over winter, and by the time it had reopened, COVID had happened, so yeah, sadly never got to use the terrace, but it does exist. The best thing about my college was the sense of community among the postgrad students, who are collectively known as the MCR, which stands for Middle Common Room, but it just means the postgrad students at the college. The MCR committee, who are like the exec committee, they're postgrad students who kind of vote in to run events for you. They put on loads of events. There was pretty much something to do every night of the week, that's not an exaggeration. Some examples I can think of off the top of my head are every week we had a welfare brunch, which was just like a brunch with free food where people could meet up and chat. There were BOPs, which are like big college parties, I guess. If you went to Lancaster, they're kind of like extras, but they're spread out across the year rather than all being in one week. There are potlucks where like everyone cooked a dish and brought it down. Actually those were ace, because 2/3 of Oxford postgrads, that's the actual statistic, aren't from the UK. So there was always like a huge range of dishes, and you got to chat about different cultures, and that was really cool. That was actually one of the coolest things about being an Oxford student, I think. At postgrad level, because Oxford have like shit tons more money than most unis. While I don't agree with that distribution of money across the higher education system, what it does mean is that Oxford has a lot of money for postgraduate scholarships. So there are people from literally all over the world. There aren't just students there from the UK and Europe like you might predominantly find at other universities. Anyway, there were also art events. There were events where we got the chocolate fountains out. The MCR owned a couple of chocolate fountains. They were always fun. There were also evenings where research students, either MPhil students or DPhil students, which is the Oxford PhD, would give brief summaries of their work. They were always really interesting, but one that was super interesting was halfway through second term. Someone was giving a talk on the coronavirus research that was going on. Yeah, there was just so much stuff. In terms of accommodation fees, Oxford is a phenomenally expensive city to live in. During my undergraduate degree, because I did some internships over the summer, I ended up staying in 5 different types of student accommodation. So I stayed in halls on campus, I stayed in three different private houses that I rented, and I also stayed in one lot of private, like halls, private flat type things, and I never was charged more than £100 per week for rent, all inclusive, so that includes all of my bills. By far the most expensive contract I had was £97 per week, and that's when I was living on campus. And I wasn't like deliberately sourcing out cheap accommodation either, that was just like the average price that you paid in that city. I know a lot of people who are on £85 per week all-inclusive contracts. By contrast, Oxford, whether you live in college or out of college, is very expensive for student accommodation. The university have a webpage you can go on where they basically tell you what you should be budgeting for while you're living in Oxford, and on this webpage they estimate that the absolute minimum you can expect to spend on accommodation is £630 per month, which is £150 per week. My rent was nearer the minimum than the maximum. It was £653 per month for a 7-bedroom flat. To be fair, the flats were ridiculously fancy for student flats. It looked like a hotel, the accommodation block. We had like induction hobs and we had like a George Foreman in the kitchen. So like objectively it was probably good value for money, but if there had been a cheaper option I would definitely have taken it because it was just like a bit unnecessary. And on top of these accommodation fees, some colleges also have college fees, which aren't optional, they're like compulsory fees that you have to pay to college, particularly for international students, but luckily Keble doesn't do that. Also, the way they deal with college charges is so weird. You can use your student card, so like your library card, to pay for meals in college, so either formal hall, which is like a 3-course meal, or just canteen food like a sandwich or whatever, and your accommodation fees go on this account as well. And then at the end of term they issue you with a statement of how much you owe them retrospectively, so once the term is done and you have to pay it off. It's something they call battles. But because they do this retrospectively, they've essentially given every single student like an unlimited credit card for food. It just seems a really unhealthy way to deal with money, because the way it works is you rack up debt for a term and then you pay it off at the start of the next term, which is like obviously fine until you get to the point when you're graduating, because then you have one payment to go and you don't have any loan coming in, and if you're in debt to the university you can't graduate. Anyway, a quick point on Oxford traditions. At undergrad level I think it's more college dependent, but at postgrad level, if you don't want to get involved in any of the weird traditional stuff, you by and large you don't have to. Now, I'm someone who really isn't a fan of traditions for tradition's sake. Like matriculation to me just seems completely pointless. Matriculation, by the way, is where you dress up and then you walk down to this building called the Sheldonian Theatre and the Vice Chancellor says something in Latin and then it's like, wow, you're now a member of the university. But our matriculation day, it was a really sunny Saturday and I spent the whole time, I remember just wishing I was out on a bike ride rather than having to like have someone talk Latin at me. But like that's just my personal opinion, and I do recognise that a lot of people do enjoy these kind of tradition things. Obviously that's fine. If you do, there are a lot of chances to get involved in them, but if you don't, like me, you can just skip most of them. But anyway, there were some things that I actually thought were really nice, like varsity cross country. So that's held in Wimbledon every year and it has been for, you know, like years and years and years, and ex-students come back to watch it, and there's an alumni race and it's just really nice. There's also Oxmas, that's another tradition that I liked, which is it's just celebrating Christmas but on the 25th of November because the Oxford term ends so early. So like we had a Christmas meal with our flatmates. I love Christmas, like the chance to have 2 Christmas meals is good. Then there are some traditions, like I said, that to me seem a bit pointless, so like I said, matriculation. But then there are also some traditions which I very strongly and fundamentally disagree with. One of these is the wearing of gowns, which I think is horrible because the undergrads have 2 types of gowns. There's one you wear if you get a first and first year, which is called a scholar's gown, and then there's one which you wear if you don't, which, and I wish I was joking here but I'm not, is called a commoner's gown. And then the graduate student gown is different again, and I just hate the fact that if people are wearing gowns, which you have to for matriculation, for exams, for graduation and for formal dinners, you can immediately tell what academic level someone is at by looking at them, and it feels like it's kind of ranking people's importance based on their qualifications, which is some horribly elitist stuff, you know. But now on to extracurricular stuff. While I wouldn't necessarily say that my year at Oxford was good overall, and the academic stuff, like I said, really wasn't great, the extracurricular stuff is basically why I still don't regret the year and why I did still have some good times. I cannot imagine having made it through the Masters without being a member of OUCCC, which is the Oxford University Cross Country Club. When I say I spent most of the year struggling, that's not an exaggeration. Especially in first term, I guess I felt very lost and I felt very alone. The lack of support I felt on my degree, combined with the fact that I was having this huge crisis about what I wanted to do with my life, whether or not I wanted to stay in academia alongside other personal stuff I was dealing with, it just made things really hard. If I was going to draw kind of a graph of how much I was enjoying my time at Oxford, it would look something like this. I really hit rock bottom just before we broke up for Christmas. I didn't quite realise how highly strung I was and how difficult I was finding things until about a week before we broke up for Christmas. I was cycling back from the sports centre and all of a sudden my bike just stopped shifting gears, and like, I love my bike a lot but it does break all the time, and most of the time I just sigh, I'd probably swear, I'd be like frustrated, sure, but you know, it wouldn't be a big deal. I'd just fix it, or if I couldn't fix it, I'd get someone else to fix it, and then it would be done, it would be dealt with. But this time my bike stopped shifting and I just kind of burst into tears and I was completely inconsolable. And it was so weird because like most of me was consumed by being drastically upset, but there was like a tiny part of my brain that kind of felt like it was detached and looking on and just thinking, wow, like, you are not okay. It is ridiculous to be this upset over something so small. There are a lot of other examples I have of me getting like disproportionately upset over small stuff, and I think it's just because I was struggling a lot, and the whole term it kind of felt like I was at a kind of level where even like the smallest thing would just push me over the edge. And the cross country club kind of ended up being the one place that felt like a refuge from how bad I was feeling a lot of the time. And having the club runs and having the drills to look forward to every week was the thing that got me through first term, to be completely honest. I think we all know that Oxford as an institution has a lot of issues, but I feel like the cross country club is a shining example of the best things about the university, and contains some of the like warmest, kindest people in the city. And through it I found like such a strong sense of community and belonging, which meant a lot to me when I didn't have that kind of feeling on the degree. One of the things I'm most grateful for, in a weird way, that it was third term that I missed rather than any other terms, is the fact that obviously cross country is a winter sport, so I still got to do all the races even though I was injured and not training much all season. So we started off with the inter-college cross country, and then there was the Milton Keynes Cross Challenge, there was varsity cross country, and there was Bucks Cross Country, which is the inter-university cross country championships. That was in Edinburgh, and it was one of the most beautiful courses I ever ran round. And anyway, from Bucks Cross Country onwards, which was week 1 of second term, things started really looking up for me and I started having a much better time. And I would say from week 1 of second term onwards, I started actually enjoying myself. I think that I just kind of accepted that my degree wasn't going to be as good as I hoped it would be, and I started trying to make the most of everything else there was to do in the city. It's really weird like looking back now, because obviously I basically don't do anything in a day at the moment because of the pandemic and there not being much that you can do, but it like amazes me how much I used to get done in a single day or in a week. Like, there were things in Oxford that I didn't get the chance to do because I wasn't there for third term, but at the same time I'm so grateful that I did manage to pack so much stuff in second term that like I feel like I've missed out on some things, but I'm very grateful that I kind of made an effort to do as much as I could in second term, I guess. And yeah, like things just kept getting better week by week until like the last week of second term. I was living my best life, I was having a great time, and we broke up for Easter and I was really excited to come back for summer term. I had all these things I was looking forward to, like varsity triathlon, Bucks triathlon, the summer booze, like picnics in the park, going swimming in the lake near Oxford, all this stuff I wanted to do, and then obviously we didn't go back. So like I said, it's a weird year to try and summarise in one single video, and this is going to be ridiculously long, but I think this chat is the best I can do of it. It's the most I've made sense of it in my head anyway. It was a very, very polarised year. There were some real lows for me, but there were also some real highs. I had a great time, to be honest, with all the extracurricular stuff and the college stuff, which you can, if you watch my 1 second everyday video, you'll see the kind of stuff I was doing. But there were a lot of lows, most notably the course content, and also the fact that I never got a third term. At the end of the day, I don't regret it, and that's because completely by chance I managed to find an area of physics which I really love, and I'm extremely lucky to have got a graduate job in that field. I also made some good friends, I learned a lot in terms of sport, and if nothing else, I'm definitely more resilient now than I was at the start of the year. I mean, there are many, many more things I could say, but this is going to be by far the longest and densest video I've made, so I'm just going to leave it here. Yeah, it's been quite cathartic to get to talk it through because, like I said, it was such a weird year for me. But yeah, it is now time to draw a line under the Oxford chapter of my life and move on to new things, which is exciting. Anyway, I'll see you whenever I next make a video.